Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to another episode of Imagineering, where we take you on a journey to discover that creativity is something that everybody uses, regardless of where you are, what you're doing, what your profession is. Creativity allows us to move up in the world and not just move on with it. My wonderful guest, my mentor, my special friend, Dr. Robert Allen Black, is a globe trotter several times around the globe. He's a professional speaker on creativity. He is a wonderful human being, and he is a consultant, and he does something called the Mind Design, which is on his website, which I will link to down below. He's also the writer of a book called Broken Crayons, and that will also be linked down below. Uh, but to most people around the globe, he's known simply as Alan. Alan, the creativity guy. Alan, thank you for doing this and welcome to this episode of Imagineering Crazy Talks.
Glad to join you, especially during Creativity Week and Innovation.
Yeah,
Creativity and Innovation Week,
yeah. That's why
which
we're
is
doing it.
celebrated every year. Say it again.
Yeah, that's why I'm doing this, to try and
Right.
celebrate World Creativity and Innovation Week for 2018. Oh, we're 2018 now, right. Keep forgetting. So, as a professional speaker, consultant, trainer, globetrotter, writer, how has creativity affected your life?
Well, for most of my adult, let's back up. I started working when I was about 16, doing freelance cartooning and artwork. Not a great amount, but some. I was getting paid for what I loved to do. Then I went to architectural school. And while I was in architectural school, I landed among my various part-time jobs was a job working with an ABC, WXYZ television news. Graduating from architectural school, I worked as an architect from the early stages to becoming a licensed architect, became a graphic designer. In other words, I spent about 20 years of my working life doing creative work. Then, thanks to a letter that my first wife and I got about our oldest son qualifying for what is called academically gifted education, those kinds of programs exist in many countries, not all countries. Anyways, it turns out they didn't have a teacher or a program. And I got active in the PTA, the Parent Teacher Association, is one of my ways to spend time with my children and to give to them. But I kept asking the principal and the vice principal, what could we do at home? And finally, one night, she turned to me and said, I have 23 children. I have a classroom and a small budget. Do you have any time? On the Monday morning, when I went into the office, I met with the partners and I said, I don't know where this is going to take me, but there's something I need to do and I want to give them 1 day a week. Do you have any problem with that? Well, besides being a project architect, I also ran a graphics and signage firm. But they both said, no problem. We know you'll get your projects done. You got a reputation for that. So I started. Some of the greatest days I've ever spent was with those 23 highly academic kids. Every one of them was way beyond me in something, at least the topic they loved. And my son, of course, was one of them. But then I started reading to learn about teaching, how to teach, how to work with children with high IQs. And I came across 2 articles by a man named Paul Torrance. One, the article focused on the message, everyone is born with potential to think creatively. Second article had to do with the fact that you can teach people to be more creative, or as I would learn over the last 41 years, you can unblock them. Because one of the research studies he did after those 2 articles, but before I met him, he called it the 4th grade slump. And he had found through extensive studies into the hundreds of thousands of children, not 20 here and 20 there, that children start off extremely creative. And he has the tests that have been used now for 60 years around the world in different countries that measure what are they strongest at. But from kindergarten is when he started that. But by the fourth grade, the numbers dropped considerably. And he wrote extensively about that. Mainly it's because all societies have one thing in common. They conform.
Mm.
And conformity quiets down or kills creativity. Creativity also means change. A lot of people, especially in a power or authority, they're scared of change because you cannot predict all the time what's going to happen. So it's all understandable. But what I've learned through the traveling around the world all these years is that you find creativity in people's homes. You may not find them in their jobs. You find it in their hobbies and in their homes, whether they know it or not. Because I've asked you to do it, and I believe you've done it, to go out and just ask 100 people randomly
Right.
a simple question. Are you creative? Do you think you're creative? And most people will say no.
Mm.
Many of them will say, oh, I can't even draw.
Right.
Well, I wasn't talking about drawing. I was talking about, but the question is one of the problems,
Right.
which is the issue with all problem solving, is too often we try to solve the wrong problem.
I like that. Yeah.
So Einstein and others have been quoted for saying that once you know what the problem is, solving it is easy.
I
That's
actually
fine.
had a conversation with a different professional speaker in Berlin last night, I believe. And
Right.
she told me that she was in Namibia for about 6 years. And she became a broadcast journalist on TV. She started with Toastmasters and became well, she did a lot of stuff in 6 years. And she just felt like there was so much more she could do. But then she went back to Berlin and she found that her creativity became stifled or limited in a way. Uh, as a person that's traveled the world, how would you compare the creative nature between people in developing countries and people in developed countries? I know it's a bit of a tricky situation because what qualifies, but
How you and I actually connected originally
mm,
was through one of the two speakers for PSAN last year, Friedrich Heron's book about the developing world.
yes,
He also has an excellent video that was created based on the book. And in that, he stresses the same kinds of things that I've seen. The creativity is there, whether you have money or not.
mm,
In fact, more often than not, it takes more creativity to do things when you don't have money. Because every place I've gone, whether it's a flea market, it's someplace out in no man's land in the outback or the bushveld, and here's this little stand where people are, and I'll give a prop here. These are all special paper clips in different shapes,
okay,
and they're specially designed and they're made by machines. But every time I go to South Africa or Namibia, we didn't do much in flea markets, but I did see a couple one day. You will find things that people make out of throwaway material. It's amazing what people can do when they want to. When my two friends and I, one South African, another one American, we used to travel in South Africa in different parts each year. We were out in what would be called the Zulu area. We're talking about people living in 4 centuries ago kind of life.
mm,
We turn a corner, and what do we see? This huge, bright, shiny aluminum thing that looks like an airplane. There's no runway anywhere in that area. So we stopped and looked at it. Oh, what is this thing? Um, it was obviously handmade. Well, then the guy who owned it came out of it. He came down out of it. It turned out to be his house.
Wow.
And it was made up of scrap materials. He had been to an airport, though he'd never flown on a plane. He became fascinated with the shape, so he started creating his airplane. Now, at the time, I had a torn rotator cuff, so I didn't go up the ladder to see the inside, but my South African friend did. And he had like 4 rooms inside of this thing, divided by fabric for the walls. But it was out in the middle of where everybody else had mud homes, like they had had mud homes for 3,000 years. You never know where you're going to see it. But one of the things I have learned in all the countries I've been in, and different clients I've worked with, is that too often people are not allowed to practice their creative thinking at work. And one of the things I kept encouraging the managers or supervisors in my programs, first thing I want you to do is I want you to find out the names of the children of all your employees, which too many of them did not know. I want you to find out what their wives or husbands' names are, and a few other things. But the one key one is I want you to learn what their hobbies are. And then think about what skills it takes to do that hobby. Then find ways that they can use those same skills at work and watch the morale skyrocket, which it will every time. The more there is creativity that is applied and respected, the higher the morale, the lower the absentee rate, the lower the lateness or tardiness rate. People want to be creative. They want to feel part of, not just an 8 to 5 job, take the check home, pay for the bills, and at the end of 40 years, they try to survive on whatever government subsidies they might have. People want to be. When I worked when I taught for the University of Georgia, one of the reasons I took the job, besides I needed one, was the fact that they had a summer program abroad in Cortona, Italy, which is in Tuscany. It's between Rome and Florence, on the more towards the western side of northern Italy, or middle Italy. And while I was there, I walked every street as an exercise in the morning. And at the time, I didn't have digital cameras, so I wasn't taking thousands of photos like I do nowadays. I had very selective, very little money for film and processing. So I started sketching drawings of the windows and the doors. There were no 2 windows, no 2 doors in an entire village that were the same. Now, the people may wear the black clothes of mourning, or they may wear the black clothes of tradition, but their homes are creative. In England, you see that too. Windows are the way to share your personality. And if you walk through, say, Stratford-on-Avon, or any of the small towns in the areas where people live in the 1 or 2 story townhouses, and you look in their windows, there are their collections of the things they are proud of. And what they are, the stories of their lives.
That's cool because in Tasmania, I've also seen that like every house has a unique post box in front of their house.
Yep.
Sometimes it's like a bicycle, sometimes it's a rocket ship, sometimes it's just something silly, but it's always something new, something different, something unique. And that sort of speaks to this is my home. This is I live here. And also even just 70 kilometers away, there's the town called Henty's Bay. And every house has a unique name,
Yep. In there.
And that's just wonderful.
Mm-hmm.
you're an advocate of creative thinking specifically, creativity in general, but you prefer the term creative thinking. Do you want to sort of explore that?
Okay. The main reason, the fellow I studied with, those two articles were written by Paul Torrance. He started in the 50s, along with a few others, to research creativity. But what he found, and it's even more extreme now, there is no single definition for creativity. There could be 7 billion definitions of creativity. So what he started to do after a short period of time was focus on creative thinking, the generation or discovery of new ideas, novel ideas, unique ideas. Since then, some academics and business people have said, yes, creative thinking is generation of new ideas that are useful. I don't go that far. I accept it, but I don't go that far because I believe, and I've seen too many examples over the last 40 plus years, sometimes we need to be creative just to be creative. And because we are, then the idea that might work happens. But it wouldn't have happened if we hadn't been off the wall for a while. So I used to stress my programs were off the wall thinking, out of the box thinking, which is a cliche from the 40s. And many people in creative thinking or creativity, if they choose to use that, actually don't like the term out of the box because a lot of times you have to be creative in the box. And I sent you that one article, in the box, out of the box, without a box, new box,
Yes.
and virtual box thinking.
I actually linked to that.
Those are limitations. You need to accept what your limitations are and work on those. So I chose, like Paul Torrance, not very much different, is I prefer to look at and try to help people think more creatively by striving towards creative thinking, which I can use a working definition, but there are people who have their own different one too. And that is the generation or discovery of new ideas or new combinations of old ideas. The stress is the new and unique. Now, some people say it has to be new and unique for the profession, the industry, the culture. No, that's pushing it too far. Not everybody is going to come up with something that's new completely, because we still have a lot of people that believe the old so-called Bible's quote, nothing new under the sun. I have real problems with that one. There is some degree of that. Yes, a lot of ideas do come because of other existing ideas. They are extensions of. That's how I use the word innovation. To me, innovation is taking what exists and improving it. Doesn't necessarily have to be vastly different, but better, faster.
Like the iPhone.
Yeah, like the iPhone.
Right. Every year it's a different model, slight improvements.
Yeah, they make a big deal, but they're usually just slight improvements.
Yeah. But 10 years later, it's a massive improvement if you take it like that.
Right. It only takes a little one each time, like compound interest, to make a tremendous difference. But what I want people is to look at situations and just ask simply the question that Steve Jobs asked his people to do. Think differently. And then I've shared with you the else questions. How else? Why else? Where else? Who else? What else? Rather than immediately go for the accepted known answer. I'll share with you my exercise I did when the internet was brand new and there were no commercial companies involved. It was just this weird thing that 5 different universities and governments had kind of created and didn't know what the hell they were going to do with it.
Yeah.
Well, a friend of mine who was already on it told me about it. He says, hey, there's a creativity group on this thing called the internet. So he showed me how to get on it. And back then that was dial up, and it was kind of like fishing in a stream. And in order to get a connection, you had to catch the fish going through the stream. And more often than not, you would miss. And you'd have to dial up a dozen times to get connected. But one night I challenged 12 people. We created a chat group, which, as far as I know, if you have a T line and access to the actual internet, you can still do this. I never spent the $750 at that time to buy a T box, which would have enabled me to have my own access, not paying anything more for it. And I said, you could set up a chat group. And what you did was you told people what the password was and what the sign-on name was. And sadly, unfortunately, it had to be in Unix or whatever the
Right.
PC type of thinking, X, Y, Q, E, had to have this, had to do it on your head kind of thing. But what I did was I let them know ahead of time what those two things were and said at 8 o'clock Eastern Standard Time, which means it could be 7 o'clock in the morning in your part of the world. All of you sign on, and I'm going to challenge you. And the question was, because they all couldn't sign on, because unlike you and I, most people do sleep in the evenings. And I said, okay, the question is, what might be possible, probable, maybe provable, but that's not important, answers to the question 1 and 1.
I love that one.
And I got 220 of them in 24 hours.
Wow, that's amazing.
Some of them are pretty bizarre, but if you accept the thinking, or what I use the word logic for is how you think. Whether you do it semestically, linearly, or like this, like a squirrel or a small animal, but you can back up your thinking. You can retrace it. To me, that's how I use logic. Therefore, there are many kinds of logic. So if you accept the logic of those answers, every one of them is right. But if a child used any of them other than the answer 2, they would be given a wrong answer.
Yeah, wrong. Yeah.
And one example that when I've done this over the years, and no doubt many others have done it in their own way. All right, class, what's 1 and 1? And I listen. What I'm listening for is variety. I'm not listening. I don't want 2. But if 2 is given to me, I know that's correct in mathematics. But here's a little girl in her pretty little dress in her kindergarten class or first grade class. She does this. Five. The teacher is immediately going to say, no, Susie,
Yeah.
2. Because the teacher was promoting standard addition mathematics. Susie was going, my mommy, my daddy, I don't know what happened, and then my 2 brothers. I've used that story around the world over the last 40 years. The question is the problem. What is the total quantity of the sum 1 added to the sum 1?
Yeah.
That's 2.
That's 2.
That's not 11, because there's always that boy in the back of the room that goes, hey, teach, it's 11.
That's me, yeah. Or 10, or 5, or...
Yeah, or however, 10,
yeah, 10,
5,
5,
50.
50, yeah.
Plus sign, less than, more than, what the imaginative mind can do. Now, no, you want children, when you're going to say, what is the capital of Namibia, not to give you 12 or 14 names. But that's not life. Life is not that simple. Never has been. Never will be. And the first thing people do, no matter how much education they have, as soon as they get a job, they've got to learn to think. But nowhere in most cases were they actually taught. And I've noticed in the last few years that the high pollen counts affect my voice. So when I've lost my voice as a professional speaker, I've learned how to do it non-verbally or visually with lots of fun. And I have my clown characters who are all non-verbals. And I had, first time that happened, I had one of my clown characters called Dr. I.L. Create, which stood for intelligence, logic, and creativity. I arranged with the client, who was a longtime friend and longtime client, to tell the group at the beginning that unfortunately Dr. Black is ill and will not be able to join us today, but he sent one of his colleagues to work with us. And then I came out in my Einstein-looking cap and gown with rainbow-colored hair and the mask and did 3 hours without saying a word. Now, most friends of mine are shocked that I could do that.
But the only person limiting you is you. You know, I keep saying that.
Yes, human beings do at times limit themselves. Parents limit their children. Owners of business limit their employees. Teachers limit their students. Now, is it deliberate? No. In most cases, it's not. But I can remember this little girl, granddaughter of one of my in-laws' closest friends, just a couple doors away. Very nice people, beautiful home, but their daughter was so anally focused on her little girl being perfect. This little girl would sit in her grandmother's living room in one of her fancy classical chairs, not moving, not saying a word. That's, knowing when to be quiet, but to have to be quiet all the time. And the grandmother wasn't like that, but the daughter had become that way. The daughter thought she wanted her child to be as polite as possible. And I only knew her up to the age of about 6. It was painful to watch. Because if my sons came into the room, it was total bedlam. Unless I say, all right, guys, calm down. And then they would. But this is one you didn't even say anything to. She was like a lump in the room. So yeah, I agree with your statement. I just be cautious of generalized statements.
So you would say that yes, we do tend to limit ourselves, but also uh, cultures, workplaces, environments, they do have limits, or they do tend to place limits on us. But creativity or creative thinking rather allows us to lessen the limits. Would you agree with that?
Go around them, go over them, go under them, walk away from them.